Calling all Swifties and champions of change, Like a Girl Media is rolling out the red carpet for you with our Thrive Like a Girl contest. We're all about celebrating powerful women leaders who inspire us to dream big and push boundaries. And who embodies that spirit more than Taylor Swift herself? Here's your chance to see her live in concert. We're giving away 2 tickets to Taylor Swift's show in London on Saturday, June 22nd. Imagine being part of the magic, all thanks to Like a Girl Media. Entering is easy. Subscribe, share, and show us which episodes inspired you the most. Visit our website or check our social media for all the details. Don't just dream it, be it. Thrive like a girl and make this summer unforgettable. Contest opens globally, void where prohibited, must be 18 or older to enter, no purchase necessary. Subscribe and share with hashtag Thrive Like a Girl and tag us at likeagirl_media for entry. Unlimited entries means unlimited chances. Winner chosen at random after contest closes May 20th, 2024. Will be notified via DM. Make sure your profiles are not private. Check full rules on our site. This is your shot to see Taylor Swift live. Don't miss it.
Welcome to the HITea With Grace podcast, where we spill the tea on HIT. Today, I'm honored to welcome friend and inspiration, Erica Olenski. She's a bomb.com communications professional and the founding executive director of August Artists. Hi, Erica.
Grace, thank you for having me.
What an amazing excuse to hang out, right? I love spending time with you.
Exactly. I'll take any excuse we can, though.
Absolutely. So let's start by having you tell us a bit about your patient and caregiver journey with your sweet boy, August.
Absolutely. So actually coming up this month of all times, August is celebrating the 5-year anniversary of his initial diagnosis. We found an aggressive form of brain cancer in his sweet 5-month-old body in May of 2019, which interestingly enough is also Brain Tumor Awareness Month. So it's a bit serendipitous to reflect on that correlation as well. But our journey started in its intensity about 5 years ago, and we've been living a complex care life since then. August is a 2, now going on 3 times survivor of brain cancer. And also as a stroke survivor that he endured as a complication from one of the brain tumor resections we had before his first birthday. And we've navigated the life of complex care in many different flavors in that time, beyond cancer survivorship and stroke survivorship, which both carry their own unique challenges. He also was trach dependent for about 3.5 years. That meant that nuance meant that he was reliant on private duty nursing as well to kind of manage his day-to-day care.
Wow.
In the home, and then also outside of the home, like going to school and engaging in the community. The clinical support required for him to just do typical things was a lot more because of the trach. And he also has a G2, which means that there's some nuances to how he takes in nutrition and stays hydrated. And then is also deaf in one ear with some hearing loss in the other. So that ability to absorb the environment the way you or I might is a little bit different for him. And he has the privilege and honor of getting to go to a school for hearing impaired kids through the regional day school program in the public school district here in North Texas, which has been a wonderful support network for him and his language development. And has been thriving despite all of that complexity in the last 5 years. He's been thriving in a large part, I think, to his strength, of course, but the community that we've been able to engage to help support him and allow him to be successful to the extent that he's able to be. And he's doing so well that we're talking about having him start kindergarten in the fall in a mainstream classroom with minor accommodations, which is one of the biggest wins as a parent you could ask for, having navigated what we have, allowing him to experience such a pivotal milestone in childhood, like going to kindergarten and school for the first time in a traditional environment that still allows him to be set up for success.
That is so beautiful. That is so awesome. And we're all cheering August on, honestly. And thank you for being willing to share his story and your story. I know it's a challenge, but you guys have navigated it so beautifully. And I know just being a friend of yours, I am always just so inspired by it and love to see his smiles and his growth. And every time you share something where he's getting to that next level, it's something that we can all like cheer on together. I wanted to talk today a little bit to you about millions of Texans losing their Medicaid coverage. I know you shared your experience in a recent article talking about the Medicaid unwinding process. We're going to dive deep here. And I want to hear about these challenges you faced in maintaining coverage for August in the middle of all of this challenging situation and challenging health experience that you are all in.
Absolutely. I can summarize a little bit of that experience. So in the fall, September of last year, we learned that August had a recurrent brain cancer. We discovered a tumor in the same location that we had discovered the initial tumor in 2019. And the conversation at that point, especially with this diagnosis, which is an anaplastic ependymoma, it's a high-grade glioma, to put it lightly. But it's a specific kind of brain central nervous system tumor, actually, not a brain tumor so much as it is a central nervous system tumor that had grew off of the brain stem itself in the cerebral spinal fluid. And is a really unique circumstance. When you're treating an anaplastic ependymoma, there are some nuances with it too. It's not typically responsive to chemotherapy. So those types of things aren't usually on the table. There's some developments in precision medicine that are changing that dialogue, but we did not have that type of insight and the genetic composition of his tumor. So that wasn't an option for us. So the best practice and standard of care for an anaplastic ependymoma is radiation, really preceded with surgery if that's possible. In August's case, in September, the tumor had recurred and meshed with the brainstem and made it clinically decided is inoperable because of the risk that would pose to him, especially having already endured a stroke to that area. So this was all happening in September of last year, 2023. And around the same time, the state really last summer into the fall, the state of Texas was going through its re-eligibility process. In 2020 with the COVID pandemic. And I'm going to abbreviate a lot of this. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that are more technical in the weeds, but from our understanding of the situation, in 2020, the state established a state of emergency, which meant anybody that was already on Medicaid or was getting enrolled in Medicaid was going to be untouched until the state of emergency was lifted. So what that resulted in is patients like August and other kids across the state that either were getting enrolled in Medicaid at the time or had already been on Medicaid were going to be automatically requalified at their renewal timeline. And until the state of emergency was lifted, none of that would be reassessed for people that have children that maybe don't, live below the poverty line or don't make more than a certain threshold designated by the state. And the state feels it's in their interest to ensure that these children have access to adequate health care. And so that's what Medicaid really is there to help support. In cases where financial eligibility is maybe not the driving factor, because you can qualify for Medicaid without being financially eligible. And one example of that is through the Medically Dependent Children's Program, or MDCP. That's a program that is set up specifically for children that meet a medically dependent clinical definition. There's, maybe 10 to 14 specific diagnoses like heart failure, trach dependent, G-tube dependent. You need to meet a number of those diagnoses to qualify for the waiver program. To get in this program, you can get on a wait list as well and also qualify that way. But nonetheless, MDCP allows you to have access to Medicaid by way of your clinical diagnosis. And so it becomes a different kind of conversation to make sure that those patients have access to adequate health care. August, my son, qualified for that program. At the time, he was trach dependent and G-tube dependent, qualified for the program clinically, and was able to achieve Medicaid coverage by way of that. There's a lot of nuances to that program in MDCP, but that's how we initially got established on there in 2020. As the pandemic continued and the state of emergency was continued up until this fall and last year, really, when they started reassessing the eligibility of all these patients, there was, just like in healthcare, we have a people challenge around burnout and clinical engagement and things like that. The state's grappling with kind of a similar fallout, just in a different
Oh my
state,
goodness.
where they hired a lot of folks to help manage the onboarding of all of these patients to the program, that they weren't discontinuing at the rate that they were previously before the state of emergency. So they wound up having a ton of growth in the Medicaid coverage program at this time, because they weren't canceling any of that coverage for any of these patients. Well, when the Medicaid re-enrollment process began last year, there was a big conversation around how do we engage with the patients that have Medicaid today and ensure that they have proper coverage, or that they're qualified for continued coverage, or if they don't qualify anymore, that we're going to have them roll off in some kind of timely manner. And how do we communicate that from the state level? So I received a few letters last year from the state indicating that some assessment was going to be coming up, which was, broadly speaking, I knew about the Medicaid disenrollment process.
It seems like insurance always kind of does a reassessment, and it seems like, oh yeah, it'll just be automatic, duh,
And my son already qualified for the program clinically. And I welcomed that conversation when I could have it. But there was, beyond the announcement and the communication, there was no other communication around really that process. And the challenge is, a lot of the talent that they onboarded through the pandemic did not onboard with proper IP sharing around how to discontinue coverage once it's there. What does it look like when a patient's no longer eligible for Medicaid? So there was a bit of a breakdown internally at the state level on how to best communicate this. So when I contacted the state and said, hey, I know I have a re-enrollment coming up for my son, I want to be proactive with you about what you need to ensure that there's no disruption in coverage. There was nobody at the state that I could talk to. So I called several times, which to begin with resulted in probably at least 12 hours of holding over several phone calls just to get somebody on the phone. And then once I got them on the phone, they weren't able to help me. And they even escalated it up to managers, and the managers did not know what to tell me, because my son was re-eligible not because of financial eligibility. He was eligible because of this MDCP program. But they didn't have the right people in place to help manage those exceptions. So what has unfolded, what ultimately unfolded for us was, on my son's 5th birthday, December 1st, the next day of the month, while he's in the middle of brain cancer treatment for this recurrence we found in September, he's actively receiving radiation on a daily basis with general anesthesia. So we're talking about, we can't afford clinical disruptions. We're highly reliant on this care to be followed through in the time that which is prescribed. I get notified as we're being discharged on Thursday, November 30th, which is his birthday, and that he's no longer going to be eligible for coverage the next morning, which is a Friday.
What a nightmare for a medically complex situation to put you in that.
Yeah. And so we're getting discharged, and I had already at this point contacted and tried to find somebody to talk to. And the only way that we found out that he was no longer going to have coverage was that upon discharge from the hospital, my private duty nursing agency that we work with to help provide care and support for August when he's home told me they ran his benefits and they came back as ineligible the next day. So that wasn't even a communication from the state to tell me that he was not going to be eligible. The private duty nursing agency just said, I can't get paid for services. So until we get this sorted out, we can't serve you. So not only was he not going to have coverage the next day, mid-treatment, but my private duty nursing was now being withheld, which is provide critical support over the last 4.5 years of caring for him.
What a nightmare. So Absolutely. What happened?
So thankfully I got in touch. I really just was hell bent on finding a solution.
Right.
And started contacting some media about the issue, and started reaching out to several parent advocacy groups for special needs kids. And it was through one of those groups that I got connected to both reporters covering the Medicaid unwinding in the state of Texas, but also was able to get connected with this one consultant who was working with the state to help manage these exceptions. And what she did the next day is helped me adjust the paperwork that I had already submitted with the proper nuances to make sure that his eligibility wouldn't get in question. And then they went through the process and found the one person managing these exceptions to provide the approval. And we got approval for him within 10 hours.
One person in the entire state of Texas. What?
Yes. To my knowledge, that's what I was told.
Wow. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and so happened to so many people in Texas. It's like you and the rest of Texas was dealing with a lot of this situation, it seems.
Yeah. And I think that's the big takeaway, right? I mean, we have our story and our own challenges around that. And frankly, we have luxury in being able to expedite my son's application. One, because he had a cancer diagnosis that was in active treatment. And I was loud and had some of the resources to go and find the right solution for him in a timely manner. Those things aren't a luxury that everybody has, and every patient is not, equipped with those resources. And frankly, they shouldn't be. We should, especially if they're getting services through a program like this, there needs to be a better way to make sure that the patients that are getting dropped from these programs have a chance to talk with somebody about how to either ensure they maintain the eligibility, because it's complicated. Complicated for me, and I've been in this industry 15 years. It's complicated for me. There's nuances to it, and there's subtleties that are not intuitive, even to the best of our ability. And it's a huge problem, especially in these special needs communities where these children either are medically complex or have other needs that require them to have this level of coverage and support socially. And these families are left abandoned without a solution. And there's some promise that it'll be retrofitted and they will have things, resolved later on. But what's resulting in this is people are not having the care that they need, or not receiving the care they need at the time that they need it. They might be going without services. As an example, private duty nursing. Private duty nursing is such an essential function to preserve the economic potential of caregivers in this country. It is an absolute necessity. And interestingly enough, Medicaid is the only real solution to provide coverage for private duty nursing. A lot of the primary payers do not cover private duty nursing because it's really a safety net function.
Wow.
So in cases when your child doesn't have the Medicaid eligibility that they thought they were going to have, and you're not having to go without private duty nursing, what that means is that caregiver now cannot go to work the way that they have been. That child cannot experience, if they go to school, they might not be able to go to school without that level of support. Although the school legally is supposed to make accommodations functionally and practically, that's not always the best solution for the family and for that and for that child. In cases where there's a trach, you need to have somebody there with that child at all times to respond, almost like a lifeguard, at a pool. If you have a child drowning, you have to be able to respond to them real time. You can't call somebody to come get them that's down the hall and rely on their response time to get there and respond in case of an emergency. So it's just such an intimate or an intricate environment of nuances and subtleties that frankly just require compassion and empathy and attention to really ensure that the families are supported in the way that the programs were established to promise.
Yeah. What basic improvements do you feel or changes you feel would be really necessary now? Like after this experience you've had, you're like, they need to do this, this in the Medicaid enrollment and renewal process to prevent things like that from happening in the future, especially for medically complex situations like pediatric cancer and more.
Absolutely. I think that there is absolutely a place for automating the process as much as possible. That I'm not in contest with. The exceptions that exist, I think, are something that should be acknowledged as exceptions. And the patient population that would be eligible for these exception-like conversations, I believe, merit a personal connection. There should be somebody who these patients can, or the caregivers really, can call and say, I have questions. I don't know how to fill this out. I don't know how to do this. How do I make sure that we're not having coverage disrupted for my child? And having that human connection and that point of contact is so essential. It's the only way that we can also ensure really that there is a trauma-informed approach to this. By automating the process the way in which it does, it completely ignores the reality that these families have to endure. And the reality as well is when you are navigating a really intense experience, like the caregiver of a child with medical complex needs, it is a highly traumatic experience on a day-to-day basis. There's
Absolutely.
a lot of micro traumas all along the way. Well, when you're in a traumatic state of mind, that's like fight or flight, the executive functions your brain is capable of having go out the window. You do not have those functions the way maybe somebody who's not experiencing trauma might be able to handle that. So it's important that we have a program or a process that acknowledges that reality. If the people that are having to solve these problems don't have the equipment to solve them for themselves in the way that we need them to, well, let's create a scenario where they feel supported and do so in a trauma-informed way, recognizing the reality of the experience in which they are managing the care for their child the way they are. And then let's problem solve around that. Give them a channel to talk to somebody that can help answer these questions for them.
What can government agencies and policymakers do to help you and like help families like yours? Like, or is there something that could be done? Could they help change the process? Or is it something that really needs to be changed from the inside out?
I mean, I wish I had the answer to that so clearly. I think taking that trauma-informed approach is really essential, no matter what that looks like. From a legislative standpoint, I think this is back to the value of patient stories. We have to hear what the experience of day-to-day life is like for these patients and their families, not just the ones receiving the coverage, but the people supporting the implementation of that coverage. How's that dynamic? How's that population of people that are experiencing the world in this way? How can we best support them and meet them where they're at in that? And the only way to do that is to understand the day-to-day life of these families that they're having to go through. What is it like to have private duty nursing? How do we ensure that the policies that we create are in support of environments where private duty nursing is engaged? You won't know that unless you ask the families themselves and hear from the patients, hear from the caregivers directly. The legislators and the people in policy-making decisions have to hear those stories to be best informed about how to craft those policies. If they don't hear those stories, they will miss the mark, and we're going to have programs like what's happening with the Medicaid unwinding issue create way more havoc and crisis than actual benefit and any sort of resources recovered at the state level.
Amen, sister. Like, seriously, I mean, it's a no-brainer, and it's shocking that this isn't part of the system and really shows a hole within the healthcare system, which is that the patient voice and caregiver voice is not being asked or listened to. And so that does need to change. It does need to change. I'd love for you to share a little bit about August Artists. Tell me a little bit about this organization and what you all do.
Absolutely. So August Artists was effectively launched formally about 2 years ago And we started a pilot program with the oncology department at Children's Health in Dallas, Texas, which is where my son was treated for his cancer treatment. And it was really inspired from our own personal experience as a patient and caregiver in this environment. What the families do when they're inpatient is they seek, everyone seeks to control their environment to the extent that they can, especially when you're in a really unpredictable scenario like a cancer diagnosis. And when you're in the hospital, there's not a whole lot of opportunities to engage with your environment the way you would at home. You can't redecorate things. You can't paint the wall. You can't order a new piece of furniture to have in that space that makes you feel a certain way. You're really passive to that experience. Unfortunately, it's just how healthcare is structured and transactionalized in our country. But there are opportunities to personalize that space that become therapeutic. And so what the families do on their own is they use these wax window crayons to draw pictures on the door of their hospital room. And it seems really insignificant when you think about it like that. But what happens is that artwork becomes such a fixture of that experience of that space. It becomes a part of the identity that family carries in their experience of care in that room, and becomes a badge, if you will, as well, of what you're navigating. And an example, you might be in the Minnie Mouse room. And as you talk to other families and interact very, carefully on the oncology floor, you might meet another parent at the coffee machine and say, yeah, we're over in the Minnie Mouse room, or we're over in the Nemo room.
Oh, I love that.
And they'll say, wow. Okay, I know what room you're in. They're not talking about room number 6. They're going to say, oh, I've seen that picture. And when you're in oncology, or really any complex inpatient environment, you really getting to go outside is not always part of where your day-to-day experience is. Usually that's a big step in the direction of a discharge. But if you're still working your way towards being able to experience outside and get sunshine and those things, sometimes just getting outside of the door to your room is a major milestone. And when you do that and you accomplish that, you can actually go for a walk around the floor. And what do you look at when you go for a walk on the floor? You look at all the artwork.
The windows. The doors.
So as I was experiencing this firsthand with my son, 3:00 in the morning, and I'm standing there drawing a picture on my son's door, but that also is a therapeutic experience to do artwork. And it occurred to me the gravity of the situation we were in. I'm sitting there contemplating, if my son doesn't make it, how do I acknowledge and honor this experience and give back to the community in a way that honors him, right? That's one piece of it. And if he does make it, how do we give back and provide encouragement, support, and hope for other families that are in these same shoes? And what also occurred to me is, as I'm drawing, that the crayons I'm drawing with were provided by the nurses on the floor. The nurses were paying out of pocket to make this community stock of crayons available. And it's not that the hospital wouldn't be supportive of that initiative. They absolutely will. But the nurses saw the value of of just making these crayons available for the families. And they themselves used the artwork when they were, low on a patient ratio, or maybe they were really connected with their patient and they had an artistic flair. They might have a little bit of time to draw them a picture. And the nurses would do this as well. So they all rallied around this concept of artwork, kind of as a therapeutic outlet, but also as a way to honor the experience and space that everyone was sharing in those moments, and the intensity and gravity of those experiences and the circumstances around us. So it occurred to me that there should be at least some way for us to make crayons available for every patient family across the country that is inpatient. How can everybody have access to art in this way? And then COVID happened. So, there were some nuances to what you could make available to families, because the experience of the hospital changed very dramatically with the pandemic. Maybe previously, when you could leave your room, you no longer were able to leave your room, or you could have your family members with you there, and no longer that was an option. So the trauma was intensified with the pandemic. And the need for outlets like this became ever more critical. And so what also occurred as we were working through this thought exercise as a board, and the folks that I had engaged to kind of help problem solve around this, was it's not even access to the art even that's so helpful. But as we learned about trauma and the impact of trauma on your ability to heal, and how do you move forward in life after an experience like cancer and take this trauma-informed approach to your healing, what is it about the art? And it's actually, the artwork becomes a badge and a symbol for that experience. Because when you leave the hospital, you don't get to bring that hospital with you. You don't bring the hospital room home with you.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a pillowcase, you might have a blanket, but you don't bring that space home with you. And this very intense, informative experience that happened in this very specific room almost feels like a dream and not real once you leave. You're like, did that really happen? Was that real life? My life's changed now, and I don't even remember what just happened.
Wow.
So the artwork becomes this focal point in your mind. It becomes a fixture it validates, yes, it did in fact happen. So what we aim to do with August Artists is actually commemorate the artwork that these families and the patients make when they're in the hospital room. And we do this by having them take a picture of the artwork and submit it. And then we take that artwork, we make it digital so they can use it. They can have it as a digital asset if they want to use that for something. If they want to make a shirt for themselves or a hat, they can do that. But we also put it onto a poster for them. So where this artwork is in the hospital room, they can now take that and put that on their bedroom door and say, I went through that experience that was real, that really happened to me, and I can feel validated that shaped who I am now today. And who I am today was marked by this image that I made while I was in the hospital. Or frankly, if they want to burn it and have a big bonfire party, they're welcome to do that.
True. Like, it's up to them at that point, but they have this beautiful symbol of this experience that was so hard. And it's wild to think of the beauty that can come from so much chaos, and that's so beautiful. So how can people help August Artists? Like, what are things that people can do to help you grow the organization and, bring it even more national? I know it's growing already on its own, just like a wildfire. So tell me about that.
Capacity is a big one. If you want to donate, you believe in the vision and mission, I ask you, please contribute to what extent you feel comfortable. You can visit us at augustartist.org. I have some examples of the artwork that I personally made when I was in the hospital. And then social media, we're aiming to actually share a little bit more of some of the artwork that our patients have made as well that we've supported. And, really too, if you're a healthcare worker, on the clinical side or even child life and spiritual care, we want to work with you too. And as we roll this program out nationally, we really want feedback from you, because we want to make sure that this program isn't something that's happening to the patients, but it is something that's working with them in their healing. And it really is a tool for their own healing process, whether that's defined clinically or emotionally and spiritually. So please, if there's an opportunity for us to work together, I would love to brainstorm and think about the way that we can roll this program out for your patient population in the best and most supportive way that we can. That's also trauma informed.
This is so inspiring, Erica. Thank you so much for being so generous, sharing your experience. It's so hard and not easy to do so. And I just want to recognize that. I appreciate you being generous and willing to share your wisdom so others can learn from it. And I appreciate that, and turning that pain into purpose with this organization. It's inspiring, to say the least, the very least.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all we can do, right? I mean, that's the best thing we can do is when we endure something, what can we share with others? So maybe it's a little less hard for them. And then, what can we do as a community to just support each other in our healing? We all have trauma. I've said many times, we can't compare trauma either. And you can't compare a cancer diagnosis to falling off your bike and hitting your head and maybe didn't even need to go to the ER. But it can still be traumatic, and that trauma is real and it deserves validation, however that looks. And I think just taking that trauma-informed approach to life and having that care around how we can support each other is just ever more critical coming out of things like the pandemic and just navigating the world in which we are today. And I'm encouraged too. I'm encouraged that the industry seems to be shifting in this direction. We've long talked about, outcomes-based care and what's possible when we look at the whole person and the whole family or population health. And I think we're moving in that direction. And I think programs like August Artists are more closely aligned with that environment. And I think we're moving in that direction, which is exciting.
It is hopeful. I've seen that too. And I've seen that the industry generally at conferences and even articles are starting to quote patients and caregivers and patient advocates and care partners. And they're starting to see them as the experts that they really are, which is inspiring and totally sets the stage for an amazing world where August Artists can just take off, and be that amazing support that it could be. So HITea with Grace loves to learn about the industry, and we also love to learn about you. And so I just really want to know, in your personal life, overcoming so many challenges and obstacles, what are things that you do to work your best and make a difference? You're a professional in so many capacities and a professional mom in so many capacities. Like, what are habits that you have that just keep you on your A game?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. A game, beyond art, my mindfulness towards my own healing from trauma, but there's been a lot of that, of course. I have an obvious sensitivity to that too, and I try to deploy that in a lot of the ways that I work professionally. Personally, though, one of the things that's been incredibly helpful for me is movement. And I would argue movement is a form of art to some extent. So I train for triathlons. I'm one of the crazy ones that goes for the long Ironman length competitions. And I find a lot of healing in the experience of working through those extreme endurance events. There's an immense community in that world too that's been very healing as well. Trauma exists everywhere, right? And I think it's especially poignant in that endurance world. So there's a lot of shared experiences there, a lot of really amazing patient stories that even come from the most elite athletes. And so personally, I like to invest in that space for me, in addition to being mom and all of those other identities that I carry.
It's so funny. I've known you so long and I had no idea about you. And that's incredible. It's a huge part of who you are. So I'm so thrilled that you do that. And I loved learning that alongside the other folks here today. Thank you for sharing it. So to finish this conversation off, right, where can our listeners find you online?
Yeah. I'm not too hard to find. You can find me at The Great Chalupa, spelled GR8, like the way you would write Have a Great Summer in a yearbook. But The Great Chalupa on X, aka Twitter or old Twitter, and LinkedIn as well, and Instagram. You can find me at that tag as well.
Awesome. And did you happen to bring tea with you today?
It's black coffee.
Tell me about your mug.
Periodic. Oh my gosh, you can't see it. Periodic table of the elements.
Like periodic, but periodic. I love
so it
that.
has like client, sponsorship, key message, Zoom. Oh, and it says tea on here. So I think we should be.
Oh, cheers to that. Cheers to that. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and, really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. And we just wish you and August Artists all the best.
You guys it's a wonderful community, and I couldn't ask for anything more. So thank you.
Appreciate it so much. And thanks to you folks for joining us too. Check out the HITea with Grace podcast for more great interviews like Erica today. Cheers.
Like a Girl Media is more than a media network. It's a community. We want to meet you and amplify your voice and the voices of outstanding women innovating in healthcare. Interested in starting your own podcast or hosting an event near you? Connect with us online or in person. We're here to support and empower you.